Good evening. Welcome to the 9th Annual Saul Cohen Lecture. I'm Paul Gordon, the president of Shoki Jewish Family Service. Obviously, tonight is unlike any of the previous 8 Saul Cohen lectures. We can't get together to socialize and share our reactions to our speaker. Unfortunately, we can't hold our pre-speaker event for our patrons, and sadly, there'll be no coffee and delicious dessert afterward. So what have we done to make up for that? This year, the Saul Cohen Lecture will be a 3-part series with the theme Recover, Recharge, and Rejoice. Our speaker tonight, Jason Rosenthal, will be followed by Tiffany Schlane on February 10th and Dr. Tal Ben-Shahar on April 27th. I hope you will all join us for the other 2 events. This new approach could never have come together without our Saul Cohen Lecture Committee, co-chaired by Betsy and Mike Stone. I want to thank Betsy and Mike for their leadership in making this happen. Tonight is also unique in that the 2 federations in our catchment area are co-sponsoring the series. I want to thank the United Jewish Federation of Stamford, New Canaan, and Darien, and the Federation for Jewish Philanthropy of Upper Fairfield County, and their leaders, Diane Sloyer and David Weisberg, not only for joining us tonight as co-sponsors, for being so incredibly supportive of us during this very challenging year. Most importantly, I want to thank the Cohen family. We were so blessed when Mimi and Saul approached us 9 years ago to host this event as their gift to our community. We are equally blessed that Mimi and her family have agreed to continue this program in Saul's memory. So thank you so much to Mimi, her daughters Amy and Rena, and their husbands Carl and Josh. In a moment, I'm going to introduce Matt Greenberg, the CEO of Schoke JFS. He's going to share some of the unique challenges our agency faced this year and how we have approached these challenges. Make no mistake, as you would expect, these challenges have been extreme, and Matt and the staff showed they were up to the task. I will never pass up an opportunity to publicly thank these unsung heroes. Now, a little bit of housekeeping. After Matt, Amy Kruglak, Saul and Mimi's daughter, will speak and introduce Jason Rosenthal. We will have a question and answer session after Jason speaks. The only way to ask a question is to submit it in writing using the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. The chat box will not work. Once the speaker finishes, our co-chairs Mike and Betsy Stone will read the questions to Jason and facilitate. Remember, the only way to ask a question is by using the Q&A box. With that, it's my great pleasure to introduce the CEO of Shoki Jewish Family Service, Matt Greenberg.
Thank you, Paul. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the 9th Annual Saul Cohen Jewish Family Service Lecture. As Paul said, I'm Matt Greenberg, Chief Executive Officer. Tonight, we're going to hear an inspirational message about despair, resilience, and hope. I don't have to tell you how challenging this year has been for all of us. As a result, the challenges we faced at Schoke Jewish Family Service were daunting. People lined up outside our doors, 40 deep, to obtain food from our Friedberg kosher food pantry, resulting in what will ultimately be more than 70,000 meals that we will be providing this year. Bags of groceries were delivered to dozens of elderly people who were unable to leave their homes. In addition, hundreds of meals were also delivered to people throughout our area through our kosher home delivered meal program, the Hirsch Kosher Home Delivered Meal Program. Holocaust survivors who had been gathering regularly in person every month were forced to use Zoom and learn how to use it so that they can continue to remain connected virtually. And families who were anxious about their health and mental well-being turned to us virtually to receive support and counseling for themselves and their children. These were just a few of the challenges that we met this year, and we were able to do it because of you and your support. This lecture series, now in its 9th year, is one of the ways that we want to say thank you for that support. And while Amy will tell you more about her father, Saul, in just a few minutes, I want to say thank you on behalf of Schoke Jewish Family Service and personally, as a community member, to Mimi, for the gift that she and Saul have provided to our community by way of this lecture for 9 years. I'd like to thank you, Mimi, for your vision, for your compassion, for dreaming up ideas and then making them happen. And to all of you here tonight, we hope this lecture series is a step in recovering, recharging, and finding a path to joy. Thank you very much. And Amy, I turn it over to you now.
Thanks, Matt. And thank you all for being here tonight. I know it's a very welcome change to watching CNN and catching the latest breaking news. For those of you who knew my dad, he probably would have been torn between being here tonight and watching the news. He may actually have probably had CNN still on in the background. It's amazing that this is the 9th year of the Saul Cohen Lecture. We've had some great speakers and great food in previous years. And now here we all are gathered tonight, exactly 5 weeks from my dad's second yahrzeit in a global pandemic. My parents were very deeply committed to JFS for many reasons, but certainly because it serves a huge need in the Stanford community. If only my dad could see what JFS is doing now to support this community. And as Matt just said, there are so many reasons, and he would be so proud. We all know the need to support others is greater than ever now because of COVID and the impact it's had on so many. I know we have people watching tonight from all over, my Boston community, my sister's Philadelphia community, and certainly the Stanford community, which JFS serves. Wherever you are, I'm sure there's an agency like JFS that's helping those in need and helping to support those really who are troubled during these unprecedented times. So before I introduce tonight's speaker, I just want to talk about why I think it's so relevant for him to be the first speaker of the series this year. So I clearly remember when Jason's wife Amy's essay went viral. I was one of the million people who read it and was so touched by Amy's clarity of thought, her honesty, and her love for Jason. It was clear they had a very special relationship. I probably even tried to read it to my husband, and he just said it's just another Facebook thing and turned over and watched sports. But I was really moved. My parents, they had an incredible relationship. You can see my background or their pictures from their wedding and their early years. Their relationship was filled with love, openness, and honesty, and they enjoyed a wonderful life together for more than 50 years. To me and my sister, and to all of our extended family, and many of my cousins I think are on here tonight, they were the role models for what a great marriage should be. So Jason, thank you so much for being here, and I'm sure that your words will be really inspiring and meaningful to us tonight during this time. But let's talk a little bit about you. Jason Rosenthal is an author, foundation board chair, public speaker, and lawyer. He's also the subject of an essay written by his wife, Amy Krause Rosenthal, called "You May Want to Marry My Husband." This went viral and was read by millions of readers worldwide. His first book, written in collaboration with his daughter Paris, called Dear Boy, debuted on the New York Times bestseller list as #1. His response to Amy's piece was entitled, "My Wife Said You May Want to Marry Me," and it was published in 2018. Amy died of ovarian cancer just 10 days after her article appeared in the Modern Love column of the New York Times. When his bride died of ovarian cancer after 26 years of marriage, Jason got in touch with real pain. He immediately reevaluated his life's work, and now he speaks publicly and writes about issues related to processing grief and finding hope and joy amongst the pain. So Jason, I turn it over to you, and we are all looking forward to your words of inspiration tonight. Thanks.
Well, good evening, everybody, and thank you so much for being with me tonight. I, of course, would rather be with you in person, and I can tell just by the meeting we had before this started that you have a wonderful community there, such a supportive community and a loving community. And so I want to thank Paul and Matt and Betsy and Mike and Amy for that introduction. Thank you. And for the behind the scenes people, Stacy and Erica and Casey, thank you for putting this program together. And I'm just grateful to be part of the Saul Cohen Shoki JFS lecture series. And what I'm going to do now is share my screen and talk to you a little bit about why we are here. Before I get into the subject matter that we're all here to talk about, which is my book, I do want to acknowledge a little bit about what was discussed in the opening, and that is that all of us are experiencing a tremendous void in our lives in some way, some form or fashion. It's a topic I'm familiar with, which is the subject in general of loss. And all of us have experienced loss over the last many, many months at this period. I think we've all sort of lost track. And that loss can come in the form of simply not having your normal routine for many of us. It can come in the form of being financially set back and not getting your normal paycheck. You're losing some quality with your children's education, perhaps. You know, we were not meant to have children be in school over a device. And that's really been very difficult for many families with young children and teenagers. Perhaps there's been a void that's been created because of the political turmoil in this country over the last many, many months and years. And of course, some of us have lost someone to this very insidious disease, this pandemic. And so I want to just acknowledge that we're doing this together, that we will get through it together. I know that's hard to think about, even though there is a light at the end of the tunnel now. And that really what we've done, I think all of us have pivoted, we've adjusted. And, you know, on November 9th of this last year, I had a Zoom funeral for my stepfather. And, you know, my initial reaction to that was, wow, here's another example of how COVID is affecting our lives, right? We aren't able to be together and grieve together and hug each other and cry together and support each other in person. But the reality is that even in that situation, we adjusted. And it was a beautiful, beautiful service attended by people who most likely would not have been physically with us in Chicago. We had people from literally all over the world who tuned in and listened to stories about my stepfather. So it was really quite beautiful. And perhaps you've had that same experience yourselves. So let's pivot. Let's go to the virtual space and talk a little bit about why you invited me to your community. And that is because I have written a memoir called My Wife Said You May Want to Marry Me. And the book is really a story in 3 parts. The first part of the book talks a great deal about love and a beautiful relationship and raising a family. The second part of the book is rather tough, and it talks in very real detail about what it's like to be with someone you love at the end of their life, and even a little bit about how to talk to people going through grief and loss. And then the final third of the book is really, I believe, is hopeful and talks a bit about what is resilience and how can we find resilience in unexpected ways in the face of a devastating loss. So the first part, who are those 2 people that were the subject of the essay that Amy talked about in her introduction, which we'll get to in a few minutes? Well, I was studying for the Illinois bar exam in Chicago, and I got a call from a gentleman that Amy and I both called Uncle John, who happened to date my mom when I was a little boy in between her 2 marriages, and was Amy's dad, Paul's best childhood friend. He called me and said, there's this wonderful woman moving back from San Francisco to Chicago, and you should give her a call. And for some reason, when I was preparing to write this book, I was doing some research on my own life, I found this Post-it note where I wrote Amy's name and phone number down, even though I spelled it wrong. And soon we were pretty much inseparable. As Amy very publicly stated, after the meal on that first blind date, she said she knew she wanted to marry me. Well, it took about a year, but I, of course, got to that same place. But after the bar exam, I had this trip planned. And so Amy and I started to write letters, good old-fashioned letters. And it was a really interesting and beautiful way to get to know one another. And you can tell from these pictures, one of which I included in the book, that we really did enjoy being together and loved each other. And you can also tell that my dark hair was slowly transitioning into what it is today. We ended up spending every moment together pretty much, and we did what every young couple does right before they're married. We started two businesses, young entrepreneurs. One was this business right here called 272 Productions, which was a business that we created and sold t-shirts. Amy was the creative department, and I was pretty much everything else, legal and marketing and all that good stuff. And we had a button business, and it was a wonderful way for us to do something unusual together. We would scour flea markets wherever we were, and we gather these buckets of buttons, sift through them, find the best ones, and make jewelry. Something new to both of us at the time, but it was really fun. And again, just a great way to get to be together, to learn about each other, and to fall deeper in love. So I said it took about a year, which is true. And what I did, this is the one and only Polaroid picture, if you remember those, of the evening that I asked Amy for her hand in marriage. I went to my dad's commercial film studio, and I snuck in there and set up this Parisian scene. Paris was relevant to both of us for different reasons. And of course, I got down on one knee, and she said yes. And, I got a taste of what it was like to live with a writer when, on our honeymoon, we compiled a list, and we called it Amy and Jason Rosenthal's Marriage Goals and Ideas. And it became a thread throughout the book. And I want to just highlight that it wasn't something that was posted to our refrigerator. In fact, I dug it out of an archive, but it really became the model by which we lived our lives as a couple and as we started to raise our family. And I'd love to just highlight a few of those messages. One was dinner time, a time to be together. Music in the background was fine, but TV was not. Never stop learning, which was very important for both of us, not just as a couple, but individually. Take classes, read, cook, and travel. And boy, did we do that together. And like I said, individually. And this was important. And it's been interesting how people have resonated with this one as they've read my book, but it's get dressed and go on dates. And for us, that was to go back to the beginning and remember who those two people were that fell in love before the chaos and beauty of having a family together. And that's what we did. Before you know it, we had 3 of these beauties, 2 kids in diapers for 6 years. And, it was both of us, but mostly Amy, who spearheaded the fun, the whimsy, and the creativity that made parenting these 3 people a real joy. Amy had been in advertising, and then after our daughter Paris was born, she made a pivot. Let's go back to that word. She really fulfilled a dream of hers to become a full-time author. And some of you probably know Amy for being a prolific and incredibly successful children's book author. Many of these titles that you see here were on the New York Times bestseller list, and some even #1. And, when the boys were little, Miles and Justin, I asked them, what do you think about your mom becoming an author? And I want to play that response for you now.
I think she's a very good writer. And I think it's pretty interesting that she's wrote almost 5 books, 500. She's an amazing writer.
Well, both boys were right. It was somewhere between 5 and 500 books. But Justin, of course, was spot on when he said that she was a really good writer. And, it wasn't just writing that Amy infused our lives with. It was creativity and wordplay and how to look at words and see different things. And that became clear when Paris, our youngest, became a bat mitzvah. And we took the entire extended family on a trip to Israel to celebrate that occasion. And of course, Amy had to infuse that wordplay on our trip. And this particular sign we made as a poster and put it on the bus that all of us travel around Israel in. And it's just an example of how incredible her wordplay and whimsy was. And here we were, a definition of our family and our Jewish values, spending a few moments at the remains of an ancient temple in Haifa. And here's a moment from that occasion, that special family occasion.
It's all amazing. I feel new. Do you feel new? I understand when they say we're.
The thing about this beautiful love story and what makes it perhaps worth telling is that all love stories don't always end the way you want them to. And so that beautiful young woman who was a bat mitzvah in Israel grew up and was off to college. And it was literally the weekend that Paris went off to college that we found out that Amy, who had just a stomach issue when she was out of town on a business trip, was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. And of course, that changed the course of all of our lives. And I've learned a lot about that disease over the course of these years. And it's something I want to share just briefly with you right now, because it's so important. There is no test for early detection of this disease. And so keep these things in mind: bloating, eating, abdominal pain, changes in your toilet. And if anyone wants this card to take back to their family physicians or their community, please reach out to me and I'll make sure that our foundation gets you a copy. Now, many of you who have been through a terminal illness know that there is a little bit of a seesaw. And so we had a period of remission in the summer where we threw an epic party at our house, and only Amy could show up with a lime green one-piece jumpsuit and that infectious smile. One of the stories I tell in the book, it was really important to me because it just distills for me, even all that I went through, how incredible and beautiful people are. And let me take a moment to tell you this story. We were in home hospice and we knew we were day to day, week to week. And I was, of course, with Amy 24/7, her primary caretaker. And so one evening I chose to go outside to get a few groceries, which was literally a 20-minute activity, just going down the street. And when I walked back down our street, it was dusk. We live on a tree-lined street with a black wrought iron fence out front. And strewn all across the width of that fence were open, beautiful, yellow umbrellas, which we'll talk about later. It's Amy's legacy symbol. And this beautiful sign, it was a stunning image. And you know what makes it the most special, the most incredible and worth telling, is that I still, to this day, have no idea who did this for our family. Amy wrote an essay. It was called "You May Want to Marry My Husband," and it was really in the form of a personal ad for me. It was poignant. It was devastatingly sad. And of course, typical Amy, it was also funny. And like Amy said in her introduction, it was read by over 5 million people. And of course, that number continues to grow up into this day. It was unfortunate, of course, because Amy died 10 days later and wasn't unable to truly appreciate the incredible response and the meaning that her words had for so many people around the world. And so there I was, my new life. Chapter 1, I found this tile at a tchotchke store, and there was no way I was passing it up. I had to get it. And quickly after losing Amy, I was thrust into this spotlight and forced to grapple with, ideas about loss. And I want to share a few of those and encourage you to read the book, which of course I expand on these topics in much, much greater detail. One is to embrace grief and know that everyone processes their loss differently. There is no right or wrong way to flow through this extremely difficult and confusing process. And all of us think that talking about our loss is going to be bringing the crowd down, and be so sad and maudlin. From this chair, I want to tell you that speaking about your loss with other people brings you deeper and opens up the conversation to a richer and deeper level. Trust me, I'm going to tell you, almost everyone in a room that you find yourself in has their very own story of loss. And this was important that I learned, and it was a way that Amy really lived her life, and that was to truly appreciate, or try as best you can, the simple moments that life has to offer, those in-between moments. And I love this quote, because we're going to talk a little bit about the topic of resilience, which may be an overused words, but I've really personally found this unexpected resilience in the face of this loss that I went through. And that is that we need to find a way to talk about both things, the reality of deep, persistent pain and the reality of living with the pain in a way that is gentle, authentic, and, surprising to many people, even beautiful. That's from Megan Devine, from a wonderful book that she wrote. And part of the way that I discovered that resilience is that I found my voice, and I didn't know that I had that voice. We were Amy and Jason, and I had to now be fully just Jason. And one of the things that I did that I would love for you to go take a look at is a TED Talk that I gave on the main stage in Vancouver, Canada, where I really told a real story about my journey through a little bit about love, but also in great detail about loss, which people were really surprised and so grateful to me for speaking openly about, because I'm sure you know through your own lives that people in this country don't talk too much about the end of life and loss and the sustaining grief that brings. I had an opportunity to discover my written voice as well. The first thing that I really wrote was the TED Talk, and followed that up with a modern love column of my own on Father's Day, the year after Amy's essay appeared in the New York Times. And as was stated in the introduction, I had the great privilege and honor of writing a book with my daughter, Paris. And of course, this book that we're here talking about this evening. And I just knew that after Amy died, that I wanted to commission a piece of public art in her honor in Chicago, where she grew up, where she did most of her writing. And so after 2 years of navigating the bureaucracies of the city of Chicago and the Chicago Park District, here is that beautiful glass-topped yellow umbrella that sits proudly in a park called Grandma's Garden. Come to Chicago and come sit there and contemplate or read a book or just take a photograph. It's really, really quite stunning. And this was at the unveiling. I've gotten to find a way. One of the issues that I was so concerned about after losing Amy was, how was I going to single parent these 3 unbelievable children who are now young adults? And I found new ways to do that and learned not only with my children, but from them, and had some wonderful opportunities, one of which was a virtual graduation message that we did during this pandemic. And like I said, I've just learned new ways to be with these three magnificent young adults. Part of what has resonated with people about my book is communicating with someone who's going through devastating grief. It's very, very difficult. And I know that this is simplistic, but it really has been enlightening for so many people. People ask me, what should I say? And the most honest and raw thing I can say is say something. Something like, man, I am so sorry about what you're going through. Or I really don't know what to say, but I'm thinking about you and I know it must be difficult. Offer to do something specific, not like, hey man, let's go get a beer. That really doesn't work because it puts the onus on the person going through grief. Do something specific, drop off some food, extend a specific invitation. The least that can happen, the worst that can happen is that person will say, I'm not ready, or I don't feel like it. And the biggest message is also quite simple. And that is to be authentic and be kind. What's given me such meaning and beauty and purpose throughout these years that I've been without Amy is starting a foundation in her honor. And we had an incredibly epic gala virtually this past October. And I want to play you just a little excerpt from that and encourage you to go to the website to learn more about our foundation.
Last spring and summer, the organizations Save the Children and No Kid Hungry included some of my mom's books, as well as the book I wrote with her, Dear Girl, in their campaign titled Save with Stories. Here is a short compilation from the project.
Hi guys, my name is Reese, and my friend Jennifer called me and said, hey, would you want to read some stories to some kids? And I was like, yeah, I love to tell stories.
I'm going to read Dear Girl, #1 New York Times bestseller by Amy Krause Rosenthal and Paris Rosenthal, illustrated by Holly Hatam.
Guess what I'm going to read to you today? I'm going to read Dog Rabbit. This is a story about two very different people looking at the same thing and seeing two very different things. This story is called Uni the Unicorn by Amy Krause Rosenthal. I love this book.
No, the rabbit is so hot he's cooling off his ears. That's the sun, and what's that? Fish.
And, you know, at the end of Amy's essay, she left me a literal blank page. To find love, yes, but really I've used it as a metaphor as I continue to move forward through and with my grief. Even up till this current day, I'm trying to find meaningful ways to fill that blank page. So for you going through loss, perhaps you as well are looking at this blank page and wondering what to do. Let me tell you that there will be plenty of darkness, but try to find the light. Loss can take you to joy, and loss can take you to beauty. That's all I have in terms of my presentation. And again, thank you so much for being with me. And I will now stop sharing my screen and look forward to your questions.
Jason, thank you very much. It's we have speakers who come and lecture to us about various esoteric things they've studied, things they've researched, just with us, in a very personal way, and provide us with lots of lessons.
Mike, we can't hear you. You're totally breaking up. So I'm going to do the thank yous. Jason, I want to invite people, please, to put questions in the Q&A. Otherwise, I'm just going to pursue Jason. I am, as I said to you earlier, a retired psychologist. So this is my bailiwick. And a couple of questions. The first one is basically, how are the kids doing? And because I think that we know that the loss of a parent is extraordinarily traumatic for late adolescence, which is what your kids were. So tell us how the kids are doing.
Well, thank you for asking that question. And you know, the answer is not a simple great or fine or anything like that. It's as
Shouldn't
complex
be.
as grief. Yeah, it's as complex as grief is, as you well know. The way grief used to be handled, I think, is that people would say, yeah, well, what can you do about it? Move on. It's not the way we treat things anymore, I don't think, in this society. And it's an incredibly complex way to move forward in life. Sure, you're going to have moments of happiness and joy and fun and all of those things. That will come after that really tight grip of grief leaves you. But so for the most part, they're doing quite well. They're young adults, like I said, they're 28, 26, and almost 24. And they have their moments of living normal lives and then really dipping back into that deep void of not having their mother who, you know, I'm sure I'm speaking for many of you, you know, the relationship between mom and a child is just different than the relationship between dad and a child. Sure, we both have similar qualities, but you know, it's been very, very difficult, but also they're doing what their mom would want them to do, and that is to try to find their way in this very difficult life that they're being faced with.
One of the things that I think is very difficult for families writ large after a loss is learning how to allow yourself joy, to dance again, to sing again, to smile again, to love again. Have they and have you found ways to joy?
Yeah, you know, early on, I was approached by some people who had been through a devastating loss, the loss of a spouse like I had, in a very public way. And I was so grateful to some of these people for reaching out to me. And one in particular said to me, Jason, you will find joy. And I looked at her and I said, no, you don't understand. I just lost Amy. It's never going to happen, you know? But she was right. Of course she was right. Time is an interesting thing, you know, it just is. And yes, I have found joy. I remember the very first time driving in my car and listening to one of my favorite songs and kind of like singing out loud again. And I'm like, wait, did I just do that? You know, am I allowed to do that? And then slowly those episodes continued. And, you know, I love music. I write a little bit about that in the book. And I went back to seeing music and, as you said, dancing and things like that. And it happens over time. So yes.
And do you still feel her presence with you?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Yeah. You know, people tend to highlight the milestones, you know, like the anniversary of her passing or her birthday or even the holidays.
Anniversaries.
But for me, and I think for many, it's those in-between moments that are extraordinarily difficult and really remind you of that person you loved and lost more. And for me, that could just be a typical Tuesday walking down the street and seeing something yellow. It could be just going to get a cup of coffee and glancing over at that picture of Amy sitting right over there. You know, so yes, I do feel her. And, you know, it's a little unique because like we are tonight, I keep her in my life. You know, I keep her in the public life because I think it's important. She had a beautiful message in the way she lived her life. And because she was a special, special human being.
Yeah, that was clear. How did you feel when that original Modern Love piece was published? Did she clear it with you? Did she run it by you? Had you read it? What was it like to see it? All of those questions.
And a good one. And, you know, it's really the number one question that I get is, did you see that essay before it was published? And the answer is yes, kind of. I mean, we were in hospice and I was sitting at my dining room table, which became my makeshift office. And she was across the room from me on the couch, tinkering away at her computer keyboard and sort of, you know, falling asleep in between with these little micro naps because of her illness and because of the medication. And then, I knew she wanted to do this one final project. And I didn't know what it was at the time, but when it was done, she said, "Do you want to read this?" I said, "Sure, I'd love to read it." And of course, I was blown away. I was blown away that she wanted to do that for me. I was blown away at the prose and how beautifully it was written. And still, with all of that, you live with a writer for almost 3 decades, even a very accomplished writer. You never know what's going to happen. You never know if it's even going to get published. But she knew, and she knew exactly where she wanted it to be published. And yeah, I think that's an answer to your question. And of course, the reaction to it, I never, ever in a million years expected.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Did you think about writing something back to her?
No, not at the time. No.
Did you?
I couldn't see 2 feet in front of me.
Yeah.
Anyone who's really been through love and loss and the grief that just grips you so tight, you can barely function. It's really true. And so, no, the answer is no. I didn't think about it for a minute. I didn't think of myself as a writer at the time, so.
Yeah, that was her bailiwick.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the questions that somebody posted in the Q&A is, how did you read the letters? What was it like to read the letters? When did you read the letters? I'm actually more curious about how did you spread them out?
You're talking about the responses to Amy's piece, yes?
No, I'm actually talking about the letters she wrote you that you shared in the book. The letters she wrote while you were traveling for that time, right after you met.
Oh yeah, no. I mean, those were in real time.
Mm-hmm.
In real time.
And when you went back and looked at them?
Oh, the letters in preparation for writing the book. Is that what you?
Yes.
It was part of the, it's interesting because the way I took the approach to writing this book was sort of like writing a nonfiction piece, even though it was my own life. I dipped back into all those little bins that many of us have in a crawl space or in a closet somewhere that we keep the trinkets from our children and the letters and the signs and the this and the that. And I took a really long time to go through all of those things. And that's when I discovered those letters again.
Yeah. What's the story with the yellow umbrellas? Where did they come from?
Yeah, so the yellow umbrella has become Amy's legacy symbol. And it started with a project that Amy did, a community project, which I would really encourage you to just jot down and then go look up on YouTube. It's called The Beckoning of Lovely. And it was a project Amy did in Chicago. And she put together this little film. At the end of the film, she said, "Meet me in Millennium Park," which is a park in Chicago. "I will be the one carrying a yellow umbrella." And she had no idea what was going to happen, whether 5 people would be there or 500 or 5,000. So we get to the park. Amy enters with the yellow umbrella, and there were throngs of people waiting for her. And it just became one of those things that, like I said, became her symbol, and we incorporated it as her legacy symbol as well.
That is lovely. That is truly lovely. Your grief experience is as a young man. You had relatively young children. You were a relatively young man. How do you, when you think about your grief experience as compared to, for example, Amy's parents' grief experience, or the grief of a family where people have lived a longer life? I was going to say a fuller life, but I'm not sure that's likely. How do you think it's different?
Yeah, it's a super complex question and a great one. Look, I think the message that I would extend is that what I've learned about grief is that, yes, it's certainly much more complicated and devastating when someone is lost too young.
Mm-hmm.
That's for sure. But the way grief works, as I've learned, is that it can be as powerful and as devastating as someone who's lived a full life. And it's easy to say, well, at least they, died approximately at the time that they were, meant to. But I think it's much deeper and more complicated for people than that.
How do you think that writing the book changed your healing?
Well,
Because the process of it had to have changed how you got from where you were to writing the book itself has to have changed.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah. The first writing experience I had was writing my TED Talk, and that was extraordinarily cathartic.
Mm-hmm.
So writing the book was not the first time that I had a chance to process these feelings and talk about them openly with the public. But it was indeed cathartic for sure, going back to these stories and writing about our life together. And I laugh only because, before all of this happened, I was just Jason living and working in Chicago. And if you were to have Googled me before any of this happened, you might find another Jason Rosenthal and get his office address. I was not anywhere near the public eye. But it has allowed me to continue to keep this story going, to keep the messages of love and loss and resilience going, and has really altered the course of my life.
Of course it has. Of course it has. A question that's not in the Q&A. Do you think your response to COVID is different because of Amy, because of her death?
Only in the sense that I have a perspective, and I'm happy to have shared that perspective over the last 10 months. I mean, my book came out in the middle of a pandemic, and all of a sudden I became this guy who, knows a little bit about grief, but
right.
It's really true. Yes. I think that those of us who have been through this type of devastating loss have lived through a lot, no matter what kind of loss that is.
Right.
And
part of what's so striking about the pandemic is the kind of layering of losses, that it's not, it sounds silly, but it's not as simple as a death. It is layering of loss on loss, loss of freedom, loss of opportunities, loss of income.
Right.
And
what I learned, I'm sorry, were you done?
No, go ahead.
What I learned early on, like I touched upon a short while ago about my reaction to people telling me I would be okay is, no, this is the only kind of loss there could be. And anyway, the point is that I quickly, because of how many people reached out to me as a result of the public nature of what I went through, I quickly realized that loss of any kind is less different than it is the same. Loss is loss is loss, which is what I wrote, and it's really true. Whether that is in the form of a divorce or a financial hardship or hitting rock bottom due to an addiction or any number of different things. And so I really respect people who are going through that and processing it.
Do you think that that's a weird question, but do you think you're better at loss because of at the loss that we are living through now because of the loss of Amy?
I just think I have a better perspective. So maybe, unfortunately, my losses built up like someone described it as a crash on the interstate. In the course of 2 years, I lost Amy and then my father and my family pet of 14 years, my dog, and then my father-in-law and my stepfather recently. So, I've had my fair share over the
Yeah, and part of what you then know is that you actually can pick your head up again, even though there are times when it doesn't feel like you can do that.
You can. You know what? I will say this though, that it takes work, and you know that more than anyone. And I do mean therapy if it's possible, if you can afford it, and if it's something that's available to you, whether that's one-on-one sessions, which was more meaningful to me, whether it's a grief group or a support group, or even just talking to your best friend. Those kinds of things are extraordinarily important. Can't do it alone.
No, you can't do it alone. And one of the things that's really striking is that our culture kind of expects us to get over this very quickly. You know, are you feeling better now? When you're barely putting one foot in front of the other.
Great point. Yeah, it's really true.
Yeah. Are there things that you wish you had done in her illness or in the grieving process that you look back on and say, why did I or why didn't I?
Not really. I don't live with regret that way. You know, when Amy got sick, I was able to, and I knew that there was only one way to move forward, and that was to be with her at every moment that I possibly could be. And of course, that took the form of being her caretaker for a long time and being with her and showering her with as much love and beauty as I possibly could.
Do you still talk to her?
No, I don't do that. I write, which is my way of speaking, and I publicly talk about her, but I don't talk directly to her.
Do your kids?
Yes, them. No,
Because lots of us do that.
Yeah, no, I know that's really true. I know, you know, my niece has told me she has many times, and everyone's a little bit different in that way.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I'm looking at a number of questions, but I think I'm supposed to let you go in a couple minutes. So what might be my last question, might not be. What was Amy's favorite book that she wrote and favorite book to read?
Oh, that's a tough one. Well, Amy would get obsessed with one author and read a ton of stuff, but I would say at the top of her list was something that she came back to time and time again, was the play Our Town.
Oh,
and
really?
You know, after she died, I reread that, and I really can see why. If you remember, one of the characters in that book comes back to, she's deceased and comes back to view her life. I think she was about 12 for one day. And she sort of looked around and said, wait a minute, why isn't everybody appreciating the beauty that's around them? You know, and that, of course, that would be Amy's favorite book.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
That's great.
So there was that.
Here's a story. When I was in middle school and I read Our Town, Thornton Wilder lived actually about a half a mile from me. And I had never met him. And I went and knocked on the door and said, would you please explain this to me? I have no memory of what he said, but he invited me in and he gave me milk and cookies or something, probably potato chips. And that's my Thornton Wilder.
That's a great story.
So her favorite book that she had written.
Oh my goodness. Well, those are her babies. And I don't know if I can answer that. I will tell you, well,
your favorite of her books.
I don't know if I can say this publicly because they're all so amazing. No, but really what I often tell people is to read Encyclopedia of an Ordinary Life, which is a adult book, you know, a book for grown-ups, not for children. And it's a memoir as well. And it's written in a unique fashion in encyclopedic entries. And it's nonfiction humor in general. And it goes through some really poignant and beautiful things and some really, really funny things as well.
Are her books, do they read differently to you now without her than they did when she wrote them?
Oh my God, yes. And also, yes. And also brings me back to these beautiful, wonderful memories of our life together. Yeah. Oh yeah.
I'm watching her. Yeah. Okay. This really is my last question. What's the best question that people have asked you as you've done this book tour? And what's the answer?
Oh, that I was not prepared for. I don't know what to tell you. I think you've hit on many of them. So I thank you for that. You know, it ranges. It depends on the audience. I mean, people resonate with different aspects of the book, a relationship, or about how to approach people going through grief. It's been one that a lot of people talk to me about. I don't know if I could pin it down to one thing. I'm sorry.
Okay. That's totally reasonable. Well, I want to thank you. I want to thank the committee that put this together for us, but I really want to thank you for giving us so much to think about, particularly in a time when we are grieving so much. And I want to thank you for sharing your insides with us, and teaching us to stay in our lives. I want to thank Matt and Paul and Erica and Mimi and Amy and Mike and all the people who work on, and Stacy and all the people who work together to make this evening work. The people are texting me. I hope that they're not telling me I've forgotten something. No, it doesn't look like it. I thank you all. Do not turn on CNN. Do something better for yourself.
Thank you so much for having me, and stay safe and healthy. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. You too.
Okay. Take care.
Bye.